Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 22nd, 2024. Today should be a somber day for all Americans as we look back to an event 61 years ago that changed the direction of our nation. It was on that day, November 22nd, 1963, that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. For those people of my generation who were coming of age at that time, it's a day that is etched in our memory forever, and a weekend, in fact, in which events occurred which you cannot forget. The apprehension of someone named Lee Harvey Oswald and his killing in the Dallas police station by a man named Jack Ruby. Now, what we know today is so much more than we knew back then. And yet the cover-up that was carried out to keep us from knowing who killed John Kennedy remains in effect. And this will be the subject of my discussion this morning. I did get a number of questions from people since this is a Friday. I'll have to answer them next week because I want to focus on this one point. But there were a couple of you who asked, what do I make of the withdrawal by Matt Gaetz of his name for consideration as Attorney General of the United States? And that's highly relevant for a commemoration of the Kennedy assassination because over the 61 years since that day occurred, there's been a cover-up in place, a cover-up which has the completely unbelievable charge that it was a lone assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, who had a very strange and checkered past. Was he KGB? Was he CIA? Was he a lone nut? And what we know today is that the people who pulled the trigger, who were behind the Oswald or behind the Kennedy assassination and the cover-up around Oswald, most of whom are gone by now, but those people intended to make sure that we never found out what the issue was and who it was that killed John Kennedy. And that's why the question of the Gaetz appointment is very interesting. It's clear that the appointment by President Trump of Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General totally panicked the establishment, because Gaetz is a person who, whatever quirks he has and whatever problems he's had, demonstrated from 2016 to the present an implacable commitment to the truth, getting the truth out about what was behind Russiagate and the attacks on President Trump, which shaped his whole first term in office and which prevented him from doing what he said he would do, which is cleaning out the swamp and achieving an end to the wars that the neocon war faction had put the United States into. Now, those wars go back in an arc from the present day to 1963 with Vietnam and with all the wars, especially the wars after 9/11, 2001. And most of these wars are the result of assassinations, of regime change coups, of commitment to undermine fights for national sovereignty in countries in the developing sector, and had an element of CIA involvement and U.S. Special Forces involvement. And by covering up the assassination of John Kennedy, it keeps people blinded to the fact that there is a faction running the United States in collaboration with the faction in the United Kingdom and with a NATO grouping, which is sometimes called Operation Gladio, which is an assassination bureau and which targets people who are committed to breaking the power of the corporate cartels that run the U.S. government and the allied governments of Europe. Now, with the appointment of Matt Gaetz, there was a possibility that this cover-up could be broken, because Gaetz demonstrated in his commitment to expose the forces behind Russiagate which, remember, Russia, what was Russiagate about? Supposedly Putin and Russian cyber operatives fixed the election for Donald Trump in 2016. Well, it wasn't, it's just simply false. It's been debunked. The Steele dossier was a product of British intelligence laundered through the Obama intelligence networks to discredit Donald Trump by saying that he was put in power by Vladimir Putin. And the intent of that was to prevent Trump from achieving a lasting, durable relationship with Russia as a partner, to the point that today we're nearly headed toward World War III and a possible nuclear exchange with Russia. And in a last hope, the election of Donald Trump, that he may be able to intervene to end the war in Ukraine, we're coming to an end of an era where these kinds of wars can expand to a threatening of human extinction through a nuclear war. So that's why this issue is so important. Now, Gaetz is someone who showed that he was committed to find the truth, and that he knew, as now almost anybody knows, except the reporters at MSNBC and many of the Democratic Party leaders, that the Russiagate story was a fraud, and that the fraud was intended so that the United States would be at odds with Russia, and that there would be a constant confrontation, a provocation. We're one provocation away from a war. And now, because of the doddering character of Joe Biden, the so-called president, who is obviously being manipulated by aides around him, the decision to unleash Ukraine to shoot long-range missiles into Russia puts us on the verge of a possible World War III and a possible nuclear war. Now, why does that connect us to the Kennedy assassination? Well, there are documents that are still yet to be released that may cast light on the cover-up and the actual killing of John Kennedy. These are among the secrets that are buried in classifications, in archives. Maybe some of them have been destroyed. But we're reaching a point where it's coming to an end of the time when we can know what happened through eyewitnesses and people involved. And by having an attorney general who's committed to exposing the cover-ups and getting to the bottom of things, Gaetz would have represented a threat to the people who orchestrated the cover-up and orchestrated the assassination. And remember, it wasn't just John F. Kennedy who was killed. It was his brother Robert Kennedy. It was Martin Luther King. It was Malcolm X. There was an attempt against George Wallace. All of these were so-called lone assassins. We see this still today with the attempt against Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovakia. We've seen it in the period after the fall of the Soviet Union with the assassination of Alfred Herrhausen, with the assassination of Aldo Moro in the 70s in Italy, the Prime Minister of Italy. There have been all these unsolved assassinations that take out leaders who are trying to overcome the geopolitical division of the world into competing blocs, into warring factions. And leaders who step forward trying to do that are targets for assassination. Let me just point out that it wasn't that long ago that there was a bullet that hit Donald Trump in the ear that was intended to blow his head off. So these are not simply references to the past, but work that must be done to ensure that those who rule by deception, by lies, by carrying out regime change coups, assassinations, launching wars, their time on this planet has to be ended. The era of imperial power and neocolonialism is over. But the people who are the benefactors, or the beneficiaries, I should say, of these wars are still in power and still have a capability to run an onslaught of attacks that convince Matt Gaetz that he had to step aside. And what was the issue in his case? Was he involved in sex trafficking? Was he committing crimes? Well, the Justice Department found that the witnesses who said that about him were not credible. And yet the narrative continued in the press, and it would have continued. And the people pushing the narrative took it to weak Republican senators to convince them that they shouldn't vote for the confirmation of Matt Gaetz, so that Gaetz took his name out of consideration because he said he didn't want to distract from the agenda of the Trump administration. Well, that kind of politics has to end. The American people voted on November 5th to end it, to put an end to the kind of governments like the Biden-Harris government, to put an end to the Obama-Biden governments that rule by secrecy, by covert action, that are covered, they're protected by a media. These days are over. And even though Gaetz may not be the Attorney General, and it does appear as though he's not going to be Attorney General now, he took his name out of consideration, but we have to make sure that the investigation goes ahead, because what's at stake here is the survival of the human race. Why was John Kennedy killed? He was pursuing détente with the Soviet Union, with Nikita Khrushchev, after we almost had the world in a nuclear war over the Cuban Missile Crisis. And what was the Cuban Missile Crisis about in 1962? The Soviets put nuclear weapons in an island 90 miles offshore of the United States. What's the Ukraine conflict about? NATO's desire to put nuclear weapons and long-range missiles on the Russian border. And the Russians saying, yet, no, you can't do that. So we have to learn the lessons of history. So as we look back on the assassination of John Kennedy 61 years ago, as we reflect with somber remembrance of the president he was becoming, the commitment he had to the scientific and technological progress of the United States and all the world, the commitment to a better culture for Americans, the commitment to peace, that was taken away from us. And we have to grab back the potential to realize the dreams of John Kennedy, because those are the dreams, as he pointed out, of almost all Americans and as well as all Russians. And so the destructive greed and corruption of the oligarchy, the corporate cartels, the military-industrial financial complex, whatever you want to call them, cannot be allowed to derail that dream of peace. And so let's reflect today on the legacy of John F. Kennedy and his famous saying in his inauguration speech, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Each of us has a responsibility as citizens to make that dream real. And so we may have lost an opportunity with the attacks on Matt Gaetz, but we still have a president-elect who says he's going to dig out these stories of the corruption, of the deep state, of the permanent bureaucracy. And we have to make sure that that happens. That's on us. And we owe that much to the martyrs who have gone in the past, including John Kennedy, who we commemorate today on the 61st anniversary of his assassination.